The alcohol industry is so insidious. They say drink responsibly. They do not want anyone to drink responsibly. They would go out of business. They are making their money on the top 10% of drinkers who are drinking 80% of the world's alcohol. They need people to drink 8 or 9 or 10 drinks a night to make their money. They purposely are going after youth so that they can build lifelong customers.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Tiffany Hall, who, since 2016, has served as the executive director of Recover Alaska. Recover Alaska is an organization that works across the state to reduce not only excessive alcohol use, but also to reduce the harms that come from that excessive alcohol use.
Tiffany Hall, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So what's your title? What do you do?
I'm the executive director at Recover Alaska.
And tell us about Recover Alaska.
We are an organization that works to reduce excessive alcohol use and harms across the state. And we do that at the system level. So we are not a provider of direct services ourselves.
So I'm guessing that there's a sort of organization like yours in every state.
There is not. That would be great. There is not. There are similar organizations certainly doing this work. Where I have found the most commonalities are in recovery community organizations and a lot of different peer-led organizations, which started out primarily doing direct services, kind of one-on-one, helping people get sober, but over the years have grown to also include sort of a statewide version that does more of this advocacy arm of it, more of the how do we connect these community-led organizations to each other. So it sort of seems to be growing right now, but there aren't a lot of places exactly like ours.
I'm surprised by that answer. And where I was going with it was thinking that Alaska's notorious for having more drinking, as many places in the far north are. I think, I may get the numbers wrong, I think we're not the highest alcohol consumed per person, but I think we're like in the top 15 of states.
I think you're right. And the numbers change all the time. And it kind of depends on which number you're looking at. But what's interesting is that we're not the very highest for consumption, but we do have a lot of the highest harms of alcohol. So, our Alaskans are dying at rates well over twice as high as the national average from alcohol, which gets even higher if you look at certain sub-demographics. We have terribly high numbers of related harms like domestic violence, sexual assault, suicide, child abuse. All of these things are not caused by alcohol, but are certainly related to alcohol. And our harms are much higher.
There's so much focus on fentanyl,
yes,
on opioids, on crystal meth, on these illegal substances that are in the news a lot in terms of causing harm and being on the rise and certainly being responsible for negative health outcomes. But not on the scale that alcohol is.
That's right. Yep. And I don't want to pit alcohol against those other substances because that's what they would like us to do. They being big alcohol, right? It's not that. We are all on the same team. We work really closely with organizations and folks doing work on other substances. And it's important to note a couple of things. Number one, alcohol kills more people in Alaska than opioids, meth, than all other illicit substances combined. Alcohol kills more Alaskans every year. And then the other part is that social norms piece that I talked about. Alcohol is just so pervasive in our community. It's almost like the wallpaper that you don't even notice anymore. Everyone I talk to says, oh yeah, we have a problem with alcohol. but they kind of feel like we can't do anything about it because we just always have, and they think we always will. And it's so socially accepted that a lot of times it's just, and this goes with most substances, not the social acceptance part, but the blame part, that it's really easy for people to want to blame the individual who struggles with alcohol rather than alcohol, because they don't want their alcohol taken away from them. They want to be able to enjoy a glass of wine at dinner, and they don't want to feel bad about it, and they don't want, and I get that. I totally understand that. And like, we just really are going to need a shift in our society with the way that, right now alcohol is fed to us by these mega corporations making billions of dollars off of the people who are struggling, off of the people who are harming themselves and their society the most. And so just to recognize that, it's not the individual's fault. It's not the individual's fault.
Well, I think there is a cultural shift on the horizon, or a possible. I have in front of me the World Health Organization's report from the 4th of January, 2023. And the headline is, "No level of alcohol consumption is safe for our health." And if it's okay, I'm just going to read a couple of sentences that jump out at me. The risks and harms associated with drinking alcohol have been systematically evaluated over the years and are well documented. The World Health Organization has now published a statement in the Lancet Public Health. Here's the statement. When it comes to alcohol consumption, there is no safe amount that does not affect health.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to skip to another sentence. Alcohol causes at least 7 types of cancer, including the most common cancer types, such as bowel cancer and female breast cancer. Ethanol causes cancer through biological mechanisms as the compound breaks down in the body, which means that any beverage containing alcohol, regardless of its price or quality, poses a risk of developing cancer. And I'll just summarize the next statement I was going to make, which is that they see these alcohol-related effects in light to moderate alcohol users. And I think this is different. I think for me, growing up, coming of age, it was around the time there was this big excitement around red wine being heart healthy. Mm-hmm. That they talked about the French paradox, that the French people eating a higher fat diet, but maybe because they drank so much red wine that balanced it out, and they lived long, healthy lives. And I think there's multiple studies over the past few years in particular that have debunked that idea that alcohol is healthy.
It's a really hard thing, and I will tell you that I am not everyone's favorite dinner party guest if this topic gets brought up. I am a sober person. I'm in recovery. I cannot drink alcohol. I'm not trying to take alcohol away from anyone. What I think is really critical is that people at least are aware of factual information, because you're right, for a very long time, up until very recently, people were led to believe that some amount of alcohol was actually good for them. Not only not harmful, but good for them. And that just isn't the case. Number one, you can look at who funded those studies. Number two, you can look at people who drink in moderation like that usually also have a lot of other healthy behaviors, and that's probably what was showing the good outcomes in health. So there are a lot of things once you start reading all of the research about how we were sort of misled, and that as little as 1 drink a day is a risk factor for cancer and other health impacts. That still is not to say I don't think anyone should ever drink alcohol. I think it's a personal decision. I eat bacon. I know it's not good for me, but I really like it, and I have what I believe to be an appropriate amount. That doesn't have as many negative impacts on people around me as alcohol might, but just to say everyone can make their own decisions, but it's really important, I think, that people are at least well informed.
how did you get the role that you currently have? Or can you just tell us about your own personal journey towards the work you do now?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. So my background, I kind of bounced around in a number of different jobs. I did fundraising, I did marketing, I did some government affairs, and I have a master's in public administration. And so I was kind of trying to I knew I wanted to work for a nonprofit organization. I was kind of trying to find my mission and what I really cared about. And I can get excited about a lot of things. But then when I saw this role posted for Recover Alaska, I thought, oh, that is something I don't have to try to get excited about. That is something that is inherent in me. Like, I owe my life to recovery. And so it feels really good to be able to give my life back to helping other people reduce or quit or get support with their loved ones or whatever that might look like. So I've been in this role since the beginning of 2016. So I guess a little over 7.5 years. I have been sober in recovery for a little over 13 years now. And it was really nice when I came back up to Anchorage. I was already sober. So when I built my community here, that felt okay. People were already meeting me as a sober person.
Teach us a little about your background. Where are you from originally? Where did you grow up?
Sure. I'm actually from Anchorage. I was born and raised here. I left for college, and then I lived in San Francisco and Austin and Oregon, and then moved back up here in 2012. So I still had friends, and I have a lot of family up here. And they had all seen me in my drinking patterns, although not everyone knew that I had an alcohol use disorder, because it can look really different in a lot of different people. And, I didn't lose my job or my home or my loved ones, so people assumed I didn't have a problem. And that's a whole other conversation that I'm happy to have.
You were functional.
I was very functional. The primary person I was hurting was myself. Others sometimes, sure, but primarily myself, and just nobody really knew kind of the extent of it.
How did you know you had a problem if you weren't losing your job, your friends, if everything was going pretty well from the outside? Mm-hmm. How did you realize that there was a problem?
Well, it finally sank in when I gave up drinking for graduate school, because I thought I would need all my kind of resources about me. And I started to get this anxiety that I didn't even recognize as anxiety. I just had this tightness in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I couldn't take a deep breath for weeks. And so I went to counseling at grad school, which was free, thankfully.
And where was grad school again?
I went to the University of Oregon in Eugene. And I spoke with a counselor there who offered to kind of take me on as one of her patients. And she helped me work through, I had this kind of laundry list of bad things that had happened when I was drunk. Something bad didn't happen every time I was drunk, but when bad things happened, I was drunk. Or so was the other person. And I had just been carrying them around for so long, and also probably using alcohol as a tool to cope with my anxiety, that then when I got rid of that, I had no coping tools left. And I wasn't really, I was not doing well. And so she worked through all that with me, and I tried an AA meeting. I'm not the only representative of AA. I know that we're maybe supposed to remain anonymous, but I don't represent AA. I'm just letting people know that was my method of recovery. That's what worked for me, especially at the beginning. And so talking with other folks who had been through it, that was really key, and hearing my story reflected back. It was easier to recognize that I did have a problem. My problem, I went through phases of my life where I drank every day, but that wasn't the majority of my drinking history. But I was a binge drinker, and once I had one, I just had no idea if I was going to have one or a million, and if I was going to black out and where I would wake up. And I I couldn't control it. I would talk to friends about it throughout my drinking history, and they said, you don't have to quit drinking, just moderate, just drink less. That's not a thing I feel capable of doing. I've never, ever have been successful at it, no matter how many different rules or regulations I put on myself. That's just not a thing that my brain is built for, at least at this point. And so over the years, I did some of those online quizzes if you have a problem, and they usually would say yes, but I would ignore it or try it again and kind of, fudge my way through a little bit. But one of the things was the kind of negative pushback I got from loved ones, people who loved me, who didn't want me to feel like I had to quit drinking because they didn't want me to lose out on that part of my life when these really bad things were happening. And looking back, it's like, wow, I could have not experienced a lot of those things had I quit the first time I ever thought about it. But society is so scared of sobriety that it seemed like sobriety was worse than these other things.
Well, and I think, and I could be wrong here, but I think a lot of times people don't want their friends to stop drinking because drinking is a social pastime in our culture, and folks want to drink with their friends, and if their friend's not drinking, then maybe they're not going to drink.
And I will say, as a sober person, I don't get invited when people are going out to the bars, or if they're even having alcohol at a party at their house. I don't always get invited, even if I make clear to them that I would be fine with that. It's definitely a social barrier for others.
I mentioned this before we got started, that I wanted to prepare for this interview by listening to some alcoholism podcasts, and there's a jillion out there. What was so interesting, and I told you this, is that I Googled best podcast to stop drinking or something like that, and clicked on a link that said the 6 best podcasts. What I didn't realize was that the website that was recommending the podcast was in Australia, and it was like a Women's Day page. And so I ended up listening to a bunch of podcasts that were geared towards Australian women.
Perfect.
What I think is interesting about that, though, is that it really shows how different it is to get sober in 2023. That I think for decades, the only way was through AA, because that's what was available in a community. But there's a lot of methods and scientists and experts out there with podcasts and books that offer alternatives.
There are so many alternatives. I'm really glad that you brought that up. I'm not going to get into some of the issues that people have with AA. I have some as well. It's not a perfect program. Most things aren't. Like I said, it worked for me, and I took from it what I wanted and I left the rest. And there are now there are programs specific to people who are working in the restaurant industry. There are programs specific to people who identify as female of color. There are so many different ones, because our whole selves get brought to recovery. And if you feel for any reason that you can't bring some aspect of yourself, then it's probably not going to work. And so I'm just so grateful that it's becoming so much more accessible in all these ways. There are virtual, there are in person, there are, international, local.
And I think particularly for Alaska, where we're spread out, we have communities with not that many people, there's a good chance that there may not be a community that really reflects your experience.
Right. And I think another thing about that is that, wrong as it may be, there is still a lot of stigma and shame connected to needing help with alcohol. And a lot of people don't want to go in person in their community because they don't want anyone to see them there. The flip side of that is, if you see them there, that means they're in the same boat you are. But it's easy to forget that. And, or you just don't want to be seen walking into that building. But you don't have to be now. You can call in, you can do Zoom, you can, there are so many different options now while we continue to address the problem of stigma.
Well, and then to get back to the statement that I read from the World Health Organization, this is fairly recent, so I think that if you missed the newspaper that day, maybe you didn't get the memo that no level of alcohol is safe, but or without potential harm. I would think that a statement like that information would be really helpful to folks in recovery, sober folks, because it takes away that feeling of missing out on something that might be healthy, that's something that's like, like being like, you know what, me not being able to have one drink is fine because one drink isn't good for you.
Mm-hmm. I could be wrong. I feel like probably a lot of people in recovery already know that one drink isn't good for us. But for people who are trying to quit, or people who are trying to reduce, or people who are kind of unsure if they have a problem or not, or who kind of need that excuse, this is super helpful. I'm in an online group around harms reduction, and somebody was just posted this morning about, I am pregnant and my baby is due at the end of this month, and I'm so scared because I don't have the excuse anymore to be sober. I want to stay sober, but I'm scared that I'm going to return to drinking now that I don't have this kind of hardline excuse. And, there are a lot of comments about, well, if you're breastfeeding, you still shouldn't. Well, it's not healthy for you. Well, you'll be a better parent, all of these things. Also, there are a lot of alternatives now, because she was talking about wanting the celebratory, champagne after delivery. But now we have alcohol removed sparkling rosé that tastes really good. Like, it's not just grape juice anymore. There are so many options, non-alcoholic options, at bars, at restaurants, at the store. So that feels really hopeful. But where was I going with this? I don't know. About the harm
moderate.
Of one.
Yeah.
Yes. And, a lot of different countries right now, as this information has come out, are doing various campaigns about just less is more. Like, you don't have to quit drinking. But if you have 1 instead of 2, you're going to be better off. If you have 2 instead of 3, you're going to be better off. No matter who you are, where your level is right now, a little bit less is better for you.
I think I mentioned this to you when we had that lunch a few weeks ago, that when I asked about potential paths of legislation to reduce alcohol use in Alaska. And I think I said I will be the most hated person in the building, because alcohol is such an important part of government culture. And I think it's a stereotype, but there's truth in stereotypes, that deals happening in bars, deals happening, people hate each other, but after a few drinks, they're laughing, patting each other on the back, and talking about potential collaboration.
Sure.
And so I could see how, no matter how good the data is, no matter how legit the study is, that people just aren't going to want to hear this.
Right. Why would you want to know something that you like is not good for you?
Or a very important tool that might be taken away from you.
Yeah. Right. Which is also just to say, no one's trying to take it away, right? That's not our goal. I'm not trying to go back into prohibition. Didn't work. It wouldn't work now. That's not the goal. And alcohol is not an ordinary commodity. It is not like bread. It is not like sugar. Alcohol is a really distinct thing in that there are so many external harms. It doesn't just impact the person who drinks it. It impacts everyone around them, whether that's through a drunk driving accident or spousal abuse or not showing up to work on time because you're feeling hungover. All of these things impact our entire community. Alcohol costs the state of Alaska $2.4 billion every year. A huge part of that is in lost productivity because of early death or calling in sick, turnover, so many things that are related to alcohol. So because it has all of these negative externalities, it has to be regulated in a different way. One of the reasons that alcohol taxes are so effective at reducing the death rate of alcohol as well as other disease and violence is because the primary people it impacts are the people who are drinking the most or people who are drinking underage. Because when you're underage, you maybe don't have access to additional funding. And when you're drinking so much, it really adds up quickly and maybe you just can't afford it. And it's another common misconception. People with the most education and the most wealth drink the most. That is not what everyone tends to believe, but when you look at the numbers and the research, that's true. And so by changing these policies, they create a safeguard for our entire community. And, there are a lot of policy changes that could happen that probably won't anytime soon because people are really afraid of it. And they're still really important to talk about because there are so many harms.
I guess maybe can you talk about the choice of villages being dry and the decision not to sell alcohol in all communities and how that does or does not affect drinking behavior?
I can try, although I don't think it's a clear-cut answer. In terms of villages choosing to be wet or damp or dry, there are, I think, currently 5 different local options that places can vote into, whether they want it to be just beer and wine, alcohol, whether they want it only sold at a restaurant or a liquor store, whether you can have it in the community, but you can't buy it or sell it there. You just have to bring it in. There are all these different, or whether the community is completely dry. You can't buy it, have it, drink it.
We have communities like that.
Mm-hmm. And to varying degrees of success, one thing that really impacts places is when a hub community has a different local option than the surrounding communities. And if that hub community goes wet and suddenly has a liquor store, then people maybe from surrounding communities come in and either drink there and drink it all at once because they're not allowed to take it back home. And so then they're traveling home very intoxicated,
or
either by
by
boat or by snow machine, passing out. Right. Maybe they don't make it home, or they're trying to smuggle it back home. But I've just talked to a lot of folks I know who grew up in circumstances like that. And the only way they knew to drink was, you go to a place, you drink it all, and then you go home and you don't drink for another month and a half, and then you go to a place and you drink it all.
So it's like encouraging insane binge drinking behavior.
It sometimes, yes. In other communities where it's dry or damp, it's working out really well for them, and they notice that it's better than when it's wet. And so, there's no one size fits all solution. It really depends on the community and that community's values and kind of how they all...
Does your organization get involved in those types of decisions?
We do not advocate one way or another for what a community should be. Sometimes communities approach us asking for help on understanding how to even get it on the ballot or what a change could look like, or they ask for research. And so we give them what we have, but the only community I would feel right doing that personally is in Anchorage, and we're not a local option community because I don't live there.
We're not a local option community.
So we have not voted into local option, which means that we can buy and sell alcohol here. Yeah, right. But because I don't live in any of those places, I don't know what the best solution is, but I'm happy to help provide the research and resources that we have.
I guess getting towards the end of our time, do you have any advice for folks out there?
Well, I think one thing that I like to really highlight is this idea of like, when do you need help? When does a person need help? How bad is bad enough? And this going back to this picture that we have in our brain about no house, no job, no family, nothing left. It doesn't have to get that bad. I think it's just really critical for people to consider their relationship with alcohol. And as soon as it starts getting to be at all negative, think about if you want to make a change at that point while you still can, while it still is kind of relatively easy. If you're waking up hungover and you have to deal with loud kids at 7 a.m. on Saturday, was last night worth it to you? Or would you rather not have to deal with that? And would you rather not have to put your kids through however you might be? Just to think about, it doesn't have to, it's not a black or white scenario. There is a full spectrum of alcohol use disorders. And as soon as a person starts questioning it, it's probably time to cut back. And for other folks who maybe don't have an issue at all with alcohol, I would just make the request to really think about whether you're inadvertently being a pusher of alcohol, right? Sometimes going to a dinner party, oh, can I get you something to drink? That always means an alcoholic beverage. And then they're like, oh, I have water from the tap, so always providing, maybe offering first a non-alcoholic option and not pushing it if somebody says no, or if somebody has one and then says, no, I don't want another one, saying, oh, it's fine, you're not driving. Don't do that. Oh, you can just have one, you're not working tomorrow. Don't do that. Listen to what a person wants and know that you're still being a good host, even if you're not forcing alcohol. I just see that so often. It feels like such an easy change to make.
If someone wants to cut back when they're drinking, believes that they might need help, do you have any recommendations for resources for helping someone stop drinking?
Yeah, call us. recoveralaska.org. We have a page of resources there, whether it is for a person themselves or their loved one. We connect with Alaska 211, which has a database of a lot of different resources all around the state. A person can put in their zip code and kind of what they're looking for and see what's close to them. But if all of that feels, we also have a screening tool. So if a person's questioning, it's anonymous. You can go on and answer a few questions and it'll say, you might want to think about cutting back, or it sounds like you really might need to talk to your doctor. Here are some resources we would recommend. But also you can call us 907-249-6647. And one of our staff members is a clinician. She doesn't provide direct services now, but she, can help people walk through what level they might be looking for, where they might want to go for an assessment, what resources are out there.
Yeah, and I guess putting my healthcare provider hat on just for a second, because if you are drinking every day, you could potentially need to have medication to prevent withdrawal.
Yes. Yeah. If you, especially when a person has kind of reached that point of physical dependency, alcohol withdrawal is one of the more dangerous withdrawals of substances. So certainly wouldn't want to cold turkey is not for everyone. And, while we still don't have enough treatment in this state, it's getting better every day. And there now is same-day access to detox. And I believe in some cases, same-day access to treatment as well, to inpatient treatment. And there is a lot of outpatient treatment, mental health clinicians, these support groups we talked about. So certainly don't want to discourage anyone. There are options available.
That I thought about a lot when you were talking about going on and filling out a questionnaire to find out if you have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Why not just not drink? Why not avoid an unhealthy substance. Like to me, I'm thinking about it in like the analogy you made about bacon. I was like, do we have questionnaires about like, am I eating too much bacon? And I'm like, why not you just eat less bacon?
Yeah.
Like if you're wondering like, do I have a problem with drinking? I don't know. Maybe just don't drink.
Yeah.
Like it's healthier to not drink. So why don't we just not drink? I mean, I guess like that's like
because of social pressure.
Yeah.
Because of like the billions of dollars that the alcohol industry pours into this market constantly, purposely targeting people who are in some way a marginalized population. I mean, they noticed that women weren't drinking at the same rates as men, so they purposely targeted women. They tried to make mommy wine time.
The death rate for women from alcohol is growing at a faster rate than men.
That is on purpose. The alcohol industry, I mean, I could go on for a long time about big alcohol. The alcohol industry is so insidious. They say drink responsibly. They do not want anyone to drink responsibly. They would go out of business. They are making their money on the top 10% of drinkers who are drinking 80% of the world's alcohol. They need people to drink 8 or 9 or 10 drinks a night to make their money. They purposely are going after youth so that they can build lifelong customers. They purposely are going after queer people, people of color, people who are feeling anxiety, people who are in depression, people who are isolated, because those will be the people who make them the most money. They are taking Big Tobacco's playbook and they just got smarter from it and are just following everything they could. I mean, that's why we had research for so long that said alcohol was good for you. It's because of big alcohol. Whereas
the carcinogenic properties of alcohol have been well documented since the 80s. So that's not,
But nobody knew that. I mean, a couple people knew that. Most people still don't know that. They are very well funded, and they...
So in that vein, is there a book about that? Because I would read it.
Me too. David Jernigan is a researcher, and he gives an incredible talk on big alcohol. I'll see if I can send you the link to connect.
Okay,
I'll try to
and
find
I'll put it
online.
in there. Is it like a YouTube or?
Hopefully, I've seen him give it at a couple different conferences, but I'll try to find.
Okay, I'll make sure that I explain how to find that and put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Did you think of a book or?
Oh my God, no! Like, I mean, right now I'm reading a really lovely book. It's called Truth and Beauty. It's an autobiography by Ann Patchett.
Is it good?
It's beautiful. It's so good. She's an author, so it's very well written, and it's about her and her dearest friend. They became friends right after grad school, who's also an author. She's a poet, but also an author. And it just describes their relationship in this really beautiful way. That woman has passed away, and I'm not at the end of the book, so I don't know what happens yet. But it's just very lovely. It's a beautiful friendship.
It's called Truth and Beauty by Ann Patchett. Very good.
Yeah.
Hey, Tiffany Hall, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Andrew Gray, thank you so much for having me.
I am placing a link to the lecture that Tiffany Hall referenced by Dr. David Jernigan in our show notes. But right now, I'd like to play a PSA that Dr. Jernigan recorded regarding parents and alcohol. It's 7 minutes long, but really worth a complete listen.
Hi, I'm David Jernigan. I'm a professor at Boston University School of Public Health, and I'm here with the Glenn Bard Parent Series, the GPS, your navigational tool for healthy families. And I'm here to talk about alcohol. And I want to talk particularly to the parents in the audience. My message to you is you matter. You matter so much. What you do matters in terms of the future of your young people around drinking. Alcohol is not an ordinary commodity. It is the #1 killer of young people all over the world. Here in the US, we lose about 4,300 kids a year because of alcohol use. The single most important influence in a young person's drinking is how their parents drink. So that's the first thing I want to say to you is whatever you're drinking, it's probably good for your children if you drink less. That's the general public health message around alcohol use. But I also want to talk about the world that your kids find themselves in terms of alcohol. And it's not the world that we grew up in. Alcohol today is so much cheaper compared to other commodities than it was when I was a kid. The main reason for this is because the biggest chunk of alcohol prices is often the tax, or at least it used to be. And alcohol taxes are based on the volume in the beverage. The size of a can of beer hasn't changed in the last 50 years, so the tax rate hasn't gone up. What this means is every year that there's inflation, which is just about every year, alcohol companies get a tax cut. The product is cheaper compared to other things. That's a powerful message for our kids. When I was a kid, a Coke was $0.25 and a can of beer was $1.50. Now in a corner store, you're likely to find that there's beer cheaper than the soda pop. That's the first piece around alcohol marketing. The second piece, it's more widely available. It's easier to get. There are more places to buy it. The point of this industry is to put the alcohol everywhere where their potential market is. We had stronger controls on this. We learned something, which is what led to Prohibition. We learned other things from Prohibition. We've forgotten so much since then. There are complex control systems in place at the state level, and we need to protect those control systems. But the main one I want to talk about today is alcohol marketing. We are raising a generation that is the most marketed to generation in history. Some of the smartest minds in the country are behind this marketing. And left without control, these sophisticated marketing techniques will aim at making alcohol look incredibly attractive, if not essential, to success, happiness, and so on. The industry says over and over again, well, the alcohol marketing isn't targeted towards kids. Well, whether it's targeted to them or not, our studies have found kids see so much of this marketing. In LA, kids ages 11 to 14 were seeing at least 3 alcohol ads a day. On TV alone, one of our studies found that the average TV watching kid saw 366 alcohol ads a year. 1 a day is really good for kids and vitamins. It's not good for kids and alcohol ads on TV. So the alcohol marketing is everywhere, and in particular, it's so many places where you aren't. It is all over social media, where some of the companies are now spending twice as much money to market as they are in traditional media. Social media marketing is behaviorally and geographically and contextually targeted. So if your child shows the slightest interest in alcohol, they will get more and more and more of this marketing. You, unfortunately, are the main bulwark against that. We say it's important to talk to kids about alcohol. Absolutely. It's also critical to talk to kids about alcohol marketing. When my kids were in their teens, an alcohol ad would come on, and I would get them to laugh about it. I would make fun of it. I would talk about the things that it wouldn't show. They would roll their eyes, but there was a counter voice. And there are so few counter voices to the marketing. You also need to know, and your kids need to know, that drinking, and in particular heavy drinking, is much, much rarer in this country than people believe. And that's a marketing effect. The marketing is there to convince you that this is normal, and it's not. So thank you so much. I'm deeply hopeful about what we can all do around alcohol. Look at what we've done with tobacco. But we've got to start. And we've barely started, and we're going to be more successful if we can take on the things that are most effective. If we can reduce how available it is, particularly to our kids. That includes how available you make it. It is not a safe practice to hold a drinking party at your house, to teach kids how to drink responsibly or under supervision. What we find in the college population is the kids with the biggest drinking problems are the ones whose parents let them drink in high school. It is a myth. It may make you less popular, but the best thing that you can do for your kids is have a warm, communicative relationship and set clear limits. They're counting on us for that. So restrictions on availability, restrictions on the marketing, we can take on the billboards, we can take on those signs that cover the windows of stores, gas stations, etc., anywhere it's allowed to be sold. And we can raise the price. Governments all over the place are constantly looking for sources of revenue, and alcohol, as one colleague of mine says, it's an extremely poorly performing revenue source. It's not paying its way the way that it used to. Every drink of alcohol generates about $2 in social costs. The average tax on that drink at this point is about 20 cents if you add up federal and state taxes. So there's a big gap there, and we're all paying for it. We ought to be able to get alcohol at least to pay for itself. As I said, I'm deeply hopeful. I'm grateful for what you do. Thanks for being such great parents.
You can also find a link to the World Health Organization's 2023 statement on alcohol in the show notes. Big thank you to Maya Narang for making this podcast listenable, and thank you to you, our listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email eastanchoragebookclub@gmail.com. That's East Anchorage Book Club, all one word, no punctuation, @gmail.com.